Well, hello everyone, and thank you for having me here today. Um, as my title says, I'm Global Carbon Director, so that means I go out there and I look for various different types of projects around the world. Um, and it's a real distinct privilege because I get to work with project developers, NGOs, communities that are looking to deploy technologies, the kinds of new models and processes that you've heard about today that result in the reduction of avoidance of greenhouse gas emissions. Um, and I say a real privilege because when I think back to the early 90s when the whole Rio conference was happening and the process was kicking off at a global stage, I wasn't at that conference. I was living in London. I was a school child back then. And for those of you who might remember cartoons like Captain Planet, that's how I learned about the UN process. And long story short, all I remember about what they were showing on this cartoon was that there were the bad people out there wanting to pollute the world and cut down trees. And all these years later on, I'm like, even though I'm wearing a suit, hopefully I'm one of the good guys. So I'm going to talk about a few examples today of businesses that we work with that have engaged with and supported avoided deforestation projects and what they've got out of that, what that's meant to them. But I'm going to touch on before that at a high level, really just how the process of what we take clients through. And then drivers, some typical drivers of why companies will engage with and purchase carbon offsets. And what I expect to be and increasingly see is specific drivers of why people will support REDD. So very quickly who we are, Carbon Neutral Company over the past 15 years. We've been a partner of choice for so many hundreds of business in dozens of countries around the world who have selected carbon offset inclusive reduction solutions. We work with some of the largest brands and offset programs in the world, and through their action, we've been able to support over 250 projects, and that number's constantly increasing, of various different types. Now, forestry has been a large part of that. It's something that we actually started very much out in terms of planting trees in the UK to where we are now. And then just in the last few years alone, our clients have committed close to $9 million just to forest carbon projects alone. So talking about the how, this is an incredibly high-level 5-step process that we talk to every one of our clients about, whether it's someone buying a few tons through to many hundreds of thousands of tons. So whether, going from the planning through the footprint measurement, target setting, reducing those emissions and communicating the value, you're probably familiar with many of those steps or one particular step in more detail. When you begin to delve in, the reality is that for each organization, it has its own meaning. One step might represent a particular challenge, it might represent a particular interest or opportunity, and you might not necessarily start in a very logical order. It might start with seeing a great project that you would just absolutely want to contribute to or do something with, and then it's a matter of figuring out how this works, how this process of offsetting and becoming carbon neutral works. With others, and I'll talk about an example later, it might be with a leader in the organization throwing out, putting their hat over the fence and saying, this is what we're going to do. We're going to go out there and we're going to reduce our emissions, we're going to have this impact on our business or somewhere in the world. And there are many examples of companies that have done that. And then it's a matter of some of you folk to go and figure out how to make that possible. So, and I wanted to start with this slide just to give you that context that despite some of the individual complexities and how each step might mean something completely specific to your organization, when looked at in aggregate, it is a simple process that can be done and is completed on a regular basis. So drivers for action. Drivers that you see here are, I could have filled this page with various different reasons, motivations, and drivers of why organizations take action. We've heard some of those today. We typically, again, when we talk to businesses, we put up in context some high-level drivers for action that we see as being the most common behind many offset programs, and they can probably be extended to various other sustainability programs that exist. We focus on this because without demonstrating that business drivers are being met and there's value being delivered against them, that nothing really happens, or when it happens, it might fizzle out or not be sustainable. So we've made it our job to understand how these drivers work for a range of different businesses. What specific language is ultimately used by one company over another, and how to bridge that gap from what it means for this company into an actionable step that means they can support a project or they can go carbon neutral. So potential future demand drivers for REDD+ specifically, given the topic of today's discussion, I wanted to delve into this a little bit as areas that we see today increasingly relevant, and I expect to see more increasingly relevant. Again, I could have filled this page with a number of different words. I spend a lot of time thinking about just how the climate is changing, and the reality of the world that we live in today is that our climate is warming. We are on a trajectory that means sea levels will rise. Now, we've got a lot of work to do around mitigation, but we have to adapt to the world that we've created for ourselves. So what that means, on the one hand, that might mean that consumers will walk away if they don't believe in your brand. Well, what happens if you can't actually make your product? Because the services, the ecosystem services that you were relying on that seemed so distant and far away are just not there anymore. So today, we've probably got some examples of people beginning to think about that, and perhaps within organizations talking about supply chain resiliency, and in the scientific world calling it climate change adaptation. It's just a set of words. But it's a set of drivers that we expect, I expect to see becoming more and more relevant of why companies may choose to support individual REDD projects in the future. So Marks and Spencer's, and leading on to the case studies, is, for those of you not familiar, is one of the largest retailers in the UK. And in 2012, they were the first major retailer to go carbon neutral in the UK, fulfilling on a commitment that they had made. They were an example of one of those companies that put that hat over the fence and said, this is what we were going to do. And 5 years later, under their Plan A program, they did that. This is a Plan A program under which they've also made actual real reductions in their greenhouse gas emissions and reported increase in net profits of over £100 million between the period of 2011 and 2012. But being carbon neutral for M&S was all about demonstrating leadership, and it's the beginning of a process for them. They've supported the regions from which they have been that form part of their supply chain. So in the past year, they've supported REDD projects in Kenya and Brazil. But being a retail organization, their consumers and consumer engagement was incredibly important to them. And that was part of the reason why they chose projects like this. I mean, there's a anecdotal quote that always comes to mind that Richard Gillies, the head of Plan A, said to us early on, which was, the litmus test of whether our consumers are going to get this is if my mum understands this. Now, I'm still trying to struggle to get my mother to understand this, but clearly M&S found that this made a lot of sense for them to do that. The next one is TUI. TUI Travel are one of the world's leading travel companies. Their carbon offsetting program is something slightly different. It's one that engages their consumers directly and encourages them to make sustainable travel choices. When you go online and you purchase a holiday or flight with TUI, you're invited to make a £1 donation to their World Care Fund. And those contributions go towards the fund's goal of creating 1 million tons of reductions, greenhouse gas emission reductions. So as part of that, they wanted to support their destination locations. Kenya, being a location where a lot of their customers travel to, became a logical place. So much so that, and this is a picture of the Kasgao project, that they were already running tours to one of the national parks that was close by to the corridor. So it became very logical for them. And their program has been quite a unique one in the industry, in that a third of their consumers will make that donation, which for that particular industry, it's a huge uptake. In addition, they've actually been able to use this program also as a engagement tool for their employees and helping to make them a really great place to work. Sky. So Sky are the UK's largest satellite broadcaster, and they've been working with us since 2006 and offsetting their emissions since then. Sky have really used carbon management and action on climate change as a tool for engaging their customers and employees in a way that they didn't have to. You know, when you think back to when the UK made that switch to bring in, and particularly the sports sector, to bring in satellite companies, Sky could have just been the most used company. Now, Lord knows we like our football in the UK, so nobody enjoys having to pay for watching football. But instead, they saw that as an opportunity for themselves to, you know, a really unique relationship that they had being inside millions of people's homes, to engage with them and become the most used and most loved supplier. And they've really built on this platform, and what it's looked like is that in 2009 they supported the first VCS forestry project with us. They've supported successive forestry projects since, and they're also working with WWF to support the Amazon and contribute to avoided deforestation in the Amazon. And they've continued to achieve outside of that program real reductions in their greenhouse gas emissions. So to sum up, forest carbon projects have been for many years and continue to be incredibly important to our global base of clients. What's really important for us is that we ensure that we're communicating the value to them and delivering value to our clients in that process to ensure they stick around and keep doing what they're doing. Thank you.